Happy Friday morning. I think everyone can hear me? Hope there's no issues with the microphone. Um, but thank you everybody for taking time out of your Friday morning to register for this presentation and learn a little bit about how you can connect your research interests to the K through 12 organizations. For the purpose of this presentation, I'll refer to school districts, schools, or campuses as K through 12 organizations in general. I thank you for being flexible and rescheduling with me. I think we have a lot better weather than we had when this was previously scheduled. I would have had a little bit of difficulty giving that presentation while my son was asking to go play in the snow. So without any further ado, we'll start this presentation. So I hope everybody can see this. This is my first time presenting via Teams, but I feel like I've become pretty accustomed to it. And I hope everybody can see this well. The title of this presentation is K through 12 Research Connection. A little bit of background about myself first. I'm currently the Senior Grant Development Coordinator for the College of Business. I see some familiar faces in the audience. If I've had the opportunity to work with you, my role within the College of Business is the pre-award proposal support, right? So helping if you need to find funding or if there's any questions to the funding agency, or if you need any assistance developing some budgets or making contacts with partners, that's currently the role that I fill with the College of Business. And if I haven't worked with you, then I look forward to working with you in the future. Previously, before I came to UTSA, and one of the reasons I actually came to UTSA was I worked in the grants office with a local school district, ending my career there as the district grants manager. And while I was involved with that school district, I worked on a lot of great projects with faculty from different higher education organizations throughout the state, I believe even throughout the country. And I was really exposed I was exposed firsthand to the benefits of working with faculty and the expertise and the excitement that they bring to their interest, right? Your research interest. Just like you have people working in campuses that are completely dedicated to, the education of the children in San Antonio. Likewise, I saw a lot of passion and interest in bringing the faculty expertise into the campuses. And just to give you a brief background on some of the projects I worked with, and the array, quite honestly, was I worked on a nutrition program where we received a grant to install cameras over the cafeteria food that the children, the students were eating, and then they would take a picture of before the food was eaten and then after the food was eaten, and worked with the faculty on analyzing like what kind of nutrition the children were eating during lunch, right? And based on that, they were able to make some changes to the food that was served, and hopefully some positive changes in those students' lives. I also worked on creating and establishing two lab schools in partnership with UTSA. It was the first ever lab school in San Antonio. It might have even been in the state of Texas. And the idea behind that was we would allocate some dedicated space in each one of those schools where faculty who were interested in conducting research or working with the teachers or principals or even generally in staff in those schools would have a place to do it. I believe those are closed because unfortunately the grant went away, but iterations of some of those partnerships still exist today. And then I also worked on a project for respiratory health of the students, measuring so the idea behind that was that we all know, and we're probably all suffering at some point, the allergies within San Antonio can be pretty terrible. Um, So that was focused on addressing and measuring the number of children or students, I call them children, right, but students, that had respiratory issues. And the idea behind that is if a student is having issues with their allergies, and can no longer breathe, well, they probably are having difficulty, breathing, then obviously they're missing school, or if they're in school, they're not really being able to concentrate on learning, right? Makes learning pretty difficult. So those are kind of some of the examples of projects I worked on. And it was because of that I thought, hey, I'm really interested in this. I will, go over to UTSA, since we're working on so many great projects together, be an opportunity to kind of continue that work, or at least build off of it. Last year, we had the first ever K through 12 mixer. I think we called it luncheon mixer here, where we hosted some representatives from school districts and really had an opportunity to get to know one another. And we were hoping to do that again this year, but as we all know, we've all had to transition, and we weren't able to do that this year. But I talked it over, and we thought, well, I was there for quite some time. I have some experience. I'll go ahead and deliver a presentation on it. And I'm really hoping that, and I know it's difficult, but if you have a question or if you want me to delve deeper into something, please feel free to interrupt me. Please feel free to, I think there's a raise your hand feature. If you just want to turn on your microphone and interrupt me, that's fine too. I'm really hoping that there's an opportunity for some conversation. I know it can be a little bit difficult, but trust me, if you want to say I have a question in the middle of a slide, then I'll be sure to stop and address it. And before I was even at the school district, I worked with the municipal government, local government, akin to city of San Antonio, but not in the city of San Antonio. And there, I didn't really have too many opportunities to work with higher education at all. But just to give you some further background of my work in the grants field. So we have I have some goals for this presentation for everyone. I think there might be some people in the audience that have a ton of experience. Are you currently working with a school district, or currently have plans to work with a school district, or and for you, I hope that you learned something a little bit new, are able to take something away, maybe a resource that you didn't have previously, or maybe a tip to help you navigate your further relationships with K through 12. But if you're brand new, and you've never done it, and you've never partnered with a school district, I really hope that you haven't come away with something that can help you maybe create an agenda for your initial outreach, and really to help you navigate that process a little bit easier, so that your outreach and your connections are beneficial to you and the school district. And accordingly, I hope you build an understanding of the landscape of K through 12 funding. Where does it come from? Where do they get the majority of their funds from? And really what motivates that landscape, right? Just like we have funders here within UTSA, NSF, National Science Foundation, Department of Defense, they all have their funding priorities, right? They all have their goals. Every organization that provides grants has their goals and like what motivates their funding, what do they want to accomplish. And I hope that you can build an understanding of some of the funding agencies that provide funding to K through 12. I want to provide some basis of how you can connect your research to K through 12 priorities, right? Like, how does your research tie in? And then where can you access that information? Throughout the slide, I have some hyperlinks that I'm hoping I can click on and we can take a quick look at. If not, we'll be sharing this PowerPoint, and they all have links to some useful information. And then some tips through some relationship building. So one of the things that I did when I was building out this presentation was contact some of the faculty I worked with when I was with the school district that I had great relationship with, great projects, and just ask them like, hey, from your side, what are some tips that you can share? Because I definitely had more positive interactions with faculty than I had negative ones. In fact, I can't even think of any negative ones that I had, but they were all kind of just organic, right? We got an email, we had some initial contact, and if it fit in within the scope of what we were trying to do, then we definitely you know continued with the grant proposal or the research project. And so I asked, hey, what kind of tips can you share? And some of those are included as well in this presentation. So I guess the first thing to understand is that the types of funding that K through 12 goes after mirror the types of funding that UTSA goes after, right? In terms of where it originates from. Where we would go after National Science Foundation as a federal level grant making agency. Well, K through 12 goes through the same thing, right? They go after federal level, state level, and local and foundation levels of funding. It mirrors it almost exactly. So there's no like mystery as to where they get their funding from as far as discretionary grants, and I can talk about that a little bit more. And just to give you an idea on the amount of funding, so the first thing to know is, by and large, the main grant funding, I would almost put it at like 90% of funding that I pursued when I was in the school district was Department of Education funding, whether it was directly through the Department of Education or through pass-through funding through the Texas Education Agency. That's something I see that's a little different because when I was in the school district, you would go after maybe one or two Department of Education level funding, right? Like the big federal funding levels, right? And I'll talk about this later, but a lot of the times you actually applied through the Texas Education Agency, but it was still federal. It was still Department of Education original funding, right? So Department of Education made grants to the Texas Education Agency. Texas Education Agency then made grants to school districts. That's a little bit different than what we do here, I've noticed. We usually apply directly to the federal agency. But just to give you an idea of the Department of Education funding, this graph here only represents discretionary funding. So discretionary funding, that's grant funding, right? That's the competitive funding. That's where they make an RFP or they make an announcement and you submit an application to it. It's discretionary, right? It's extra funding that they receive to help advance their goals or their priorities that they've identified for the year. And as you can see, it's a pretty dramatic rise, right? I didn't even know this, but when I was doing this presentation, I kind of put these numbers together. When it first started in 1980, they had about $11.5 million, and in 2020 they had $72 million in grant awarded. I thought that was pretty impressive. This doesn't represent any stimulus funding. I think the first one was the American Recovery, the ARA funds. It doesn't represent that. It doesn't represent the CARES funding that was passed 8 months ago, and it doesn't represent the most recent American Rescue Plan. But as you can see, that's where the vast majority of grant funding comes from. And what drives that funding, right? So if this is discretionary funding, what drives it, right? Because it has to be based on something. By and large, the department's priority performance goals are what drives those. These change every year, and there's some what you would call like legacy grants that are available from the Department of Education. So grants that are just always available, and they'll make some priority points awarded to align with the priority performance goals, but the actual program itself kind of remains the same. A good example of that is like the 21st century grants. So those grants are basically after-school grants. It's made to provide after-school opportunities for students, some extended learning opportunities for students. But they'll provide like some priority points that align with the priority performance goals. So, and then you can find the discretionary grant funding from the Department of Education on this link. I'm going to click on it. Earlier in the morning, I was having trouble, but let me see. Actually, I think I have it pulled up already. Stop sharing. So, if my opinion mattered, I would say that the Department of Education's discretionary grant programs landing page is probably the best landing page for grants available, in my opinion. I think they make it pretty easy and it's updated pretty frequently. You can also find this information on grants.gov, but truthfully, I prefer to use this because they have a little bit, they break it up into these nice categories, letting you know where the funding comes from, who's eligible, a direct link to the notice, and then the program webpage. What I wanted to point to here is if you if if I was faculty, right, and I was looking for research related funding, I would look in the institution of education sciences, right? That's typically the funding agency that provides the most research related, or the department within the education that offers the most research related funding. You'll see that they're looking for programs that are innovative, that that address a new concept. This is a great resource to have. I actually applied to one of these with I believe it wasn't UTSA, it was another institution. We didn't receive it, but it was a great project to work on. So this is a resource for you as you're looking for funding. I honestly recommend this way above grants.gov. Go back to the PowerPoint. And then state level funding that's available to school districts. Um, you'll see that it's the Texas Education Agency, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, and the Texas Workforce Commission. Within the Texas Education Agency, they receive a lot of funding from the Department of Education. I'd say most of their funding is from the Department of Education. It's primarily ISD focused. There's opportunities for research there, but mainly around the areas of like principal preparation and teacher preparation. Um, there's some opportunities there for school turnaround, meaning like a low performing school to a high performing school. That's a great opportunity there as well. The Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, I'm pretty sure everyone here is familiar with it. But if you're not familiar with it, most of their funding is actually awarded to 2-year and 4-year IHEs. But what I would say is that every now and then they'll have an opportunity that's targeted and very specific to a topic that they want to address, right? So I know they're very involved with autism related research, special population related research. Um, but other than that, I haven't noticed too much. There's some opportunities there for like making college less expensive for students. And then there's a Texas Workforce Commission. That's a great opportunity for STEM related summer camps. I know that we have a pretty extensive summer camp program here with UTSA, or we did, and hopefully we'll have it again soon. But that's a great resource for Texas for summer camps. You'll notice whenever you look at funding there that it's industry and job seeker related. And accordingly, what you'll see there a lot is like STEM related funding, cybersecurity, those types of topics, because it has to be on workforce development. And as you know, those are some pretty uh, important jobs that we're looking to fill. And I have links to here as well. If you're not familiar, I would like to take you to this Texas Education Agency link if you haven't noted, if you haven't visited yet. Let me see. So this is the landing page for the Texas Education Agency, the grants website. It's not too difficult to find. It used to be really difficult to find. You used to have to know a specific link and then go in there. But now they've made it pretty easily uh, uh, to find. Is you'll see the opportunities that are open now. As I mentioned in the presentation, a lot of it is focused on principals and teachers. This P-Tech is an opportunity to get students associate's degrees. I think we have like 3 P-Techs here in San Antonio. But as you notice, these are mostly ISD focused, school district focused, K through 12 focused. But if there's something STEM related in there or that you could use your research or to fill, this would be an opportunity to find it here. You can search by keywords here. It's a great resource to have. And again, we'll be sharing that in the PowerPoint. And these are all hyperlinks to the funding agency for each one. Local foundations, I didn't experience too much opportunities to work on research related projects with local foundations until recently. With the recent pandemic, I believe there was some opportunities from the San Antonio Area Foundation to do some pandemic related research, I think specifically to K through 12 or within specifically targeting K through 12 students. There's some national level opportunities, but again, even when I was in the school district, I didn't really work on too many of these. What would happen is um, a foundation would contact the school district and they would say, hey, well, we want you to provide some um, program on XYZ, and we would respond accordingly to their request. I worked on Bill and Melinda Gates one and a Walmart, and I believe there was a third one, a large corporate foundation. But again, I never responded to them, and I think the best route to go if you're looking for local is monitor the San Antonio Area Foundation opportunities. And then making your research connection, right? We have all sorts of interest here at UTSA, all sorts of research, awesome research that's being conducted. But if you're approaching a school district, one of the things you want to keep in mind is that you're what drives school districts, right? What drives what happens in a school district is by and large the TEKS, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, right? Connecting your research to the state standard, right? So basically, what it is the TEKS is what the TEKS does is it outlines what needs to be taught at what grade level in each school, right? So if you're in 4th grade at a school district, it doesn't matter what 4th grade you're in; it could be across the state. You're going to learn a certain topic in that grade, right? It has to. It's what's tested. It's what drives the entire instruction for that day. So if you can connect your research to a topic in the TEKS, and I'll show you where you can find that further. If you can make that initial connection, then that's great. Then you have a direct line into like how your research ties and supports that, right? Because at the end of the day, the principal, the superintendent, the principals, the teachers, everybody in that school district is responsible for that TEKS, right? They're saying if we're open, we're teaching that. So if you can connect your research to that, it gives you a really good, strong chance of having a positive outcome to your outreach. But that's only here in Texas. Um, Elsewhere, other states around the nation, they use the Common Core standards. I'm not too familiar with the Common Core standards because I was only in a school district here in Texas. But I will say that if you're planning on doing research on a multi-state, at a national level, or even if you're just partnering with another state, where that's important is that, let's say you're designing a new curriculum or you're integrating your research into that curriculum. Well, you might have to be able to level that, right? Like, how does the Common Core standards match up with that in Texas and TEKS? Um, like I said, I didn't, when I was doing this presentation, I learned about the Common Core standards. I literally never had to address it at all the whole time, because it was all about the TEKS. Even when I was doing grants for the Department of Education, it was always about talking about the TEKS, all right? And again, there's the Department of Education agency priority goals. If you can connect your research to that, that's an opportunity for you to also be able to find some funding for it. And just to give you some perspective, this is from the Common Core's website. All of the states that are in green all use the Common Core, and all the states in yellow don't use the Common Core. I don't think they use TEKS, but they probably use their respective states, education agencies standards. But as you can see, most states use the Common Core. And I was going to give you an example of the Common Core math standards. When I was reading this and putting this presentation together, I hadn't ever really looked at the Common Core standards. But when I clicked on it and when I started reading about it, I actually think that they are great. I think that they give you really good examples of what needs to be in each section. Where is this? So if your research had to focus on math and you were wanting to make that connection, this is where you would look into it. Every subject has the state standards for Common Core for each subject, and you can see it's kind of narrated by each grade level. And if you scroll down, I won't spend too much time on it, but I just wanted to give you an example of how detailed it is, right? So that you can review it and make your connection there, right? And I just think it's awesome. And I'm telling you it's awesome because I'm comparing it to what you see if you go onto the TEKS section. And this is also, I won't skip back and forth between the PowerPoint, but I had a slide in there that took you a link to the TEKS. And as you can see, this is where you would click into it. And again, I'm going to follow the same subject matter. You would click on the math, and then you would click onto wherever grade level, say your research had to do on the lower grade levels or an appropriate grade level here. Let's look at something that I'm not going to have any clue what it is, but you can see where it takes you into there. If your research had to do with this, definitely review how it ties into that. And then when you make that initial outreach, you would have a better idea of what grade level you would be working with, what grade level of teachers you'd be working with, what school you would be working with, right? Because if you're looking at this and this is what connects to your research, you're going to know that you're working in a high school, right? So have that as a thought, right? You know where you're gonna be basically. Where was I? So we covered that. So this was the TEKS website that I was bringing up. I didn't know if I was going to be able to navigate it and click on it, so I wanted to put some examples there. This is the high school. This is an example, right, of the knowledge and skills for each section. And it tells you how much instructional time for each section. And then some helpful resources, right? I think that I'll talk about this a little bit more. We've kind of talked, we've discussed, okay, you know that your research has to align with the TEKS, right? So at least you have an idea of the subject matter, what grade level, and based on that grade level, some schools that you might be able to reach out to, right? But there's also all sorts of different I guess, variables that come into play, right? And one of them is low performing and high performing, right? And what does that mean? Well, everything's driven on the state assessments, right? And I'm pretty sure everybody's heard about state assessments and whether they're for them or against them. Usually you only hear stuff that's against them. I won't take a position on that, but I will say that it does drive quite a bit of the the work that occurs in each school. And so if you're in a school that didn't perform very highly on the state assessments, what happens is the state will designate that campus as either comprehensive support, needing comprehensive support, or targeted support. And each one of those comes with basically rules that the school has to operate by to get out of that designation, right? And each one of these hyperlinks gives you a list of every single campus in Texas and every single school district in Texas, schools that are labeled comprehensive and targeted support. I'm not going to click in there because it's just an Excel spreadsheet, but it's for you, and it's updated every year based on the previous year's performance on the assessments. Now, how does that connect? How does that impact your outreach? Okay, so you don't want to be in comprehensive or target support. Like at your school, you don't want to be there. It's not good. But some school districts have quite a bit of schools that are in comprehensive and target support, right? Now, if you're doing if you're doing some research and like, hey, who could I reach out to? And you notice that the school district only has one or two schools that are under this program, this comprehensive and target support, you're probably not going to get very much traction when you reach out to that school, because what they're going to be focused on is, hey, we're going to perform on this assessment. All the spare time that we have is going to be on getting out of this. Maybe if your research is on school turnaround, you might gain some more traction, but by and large, their efforts are going to be to get out of that, right? Because there's some consequences to staying in there. And I won't get too much into that because I'm not an expert on accountability or anything like that, school accountability. But you might also be in a school district where they have quite a few campuses that are under this designation. And you may be able, it might be just business as usual there, right? It might be like, hey, we have a lot of campuses, we could use the extra help because we don't have the resources to do that. But basically, it's just a resource for you to have. If you're outlining where you can make that connection, you know that, hey, maybe I might want to avoid these schools, or I might want to work with the schools. I don't know. It's just a resource for you to have. There is some benefits there. You do get additional funding. I don't know if they're really going to use it specifically to fund research, but it's just a resource for you to have. And I think sometimes it's not easily found, but it's there for your review and reference. And then wanted to include some tips to consider, right? So this section is basically some insight for you to use. This is kind of tips that I had. I'm putting myself back when I was with the school district, when I worked with faculty, was kind of navigating this process, right? Navigating the processes to partnership. Something for you to consider, timing matters, right? We covered in a couple slides ago how the state assessments drive so much of the work that occurs in each campus. Well, timing matters, time of the year matters, right? Because in the springtime, right about now, actually, what's happening, well, maybe not this year, but in normal years, it's state assessment time. So if you're planning your research, as you plan your research, you can pretty much block out January to about the end of March, early May, April as times that probably not the best time, because what's happening during those times is a lot of effort into making sure the students perform well on assessments, right? I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying that by and large, that's what occurs during that time. I remember when I was there, I was in the grants office, and I don't have any teaching background, but I was in the grants office, and it was like, hey, if you can provide support to the campus anyway, you might want to get out there and provide help, like whether that's going around and making sure that there's like a clean environment that's conducive to testing. Like we can help out with that. So timing of the year matters when you make the approach. Uh, Beginning of the year, if you can make that initial contact, that's the best time, because now they kind of have a nice open window where you can fit in, right? Before and after school, what's coined extended learning time, right? That's like the big phrase in K through 12, extended learning time, right? If your research can be conducted before or after school, whether it's with students or with teachers or with operations or anything, if you can do it before or after school, man, it's perfect. You got like a lot more flexibility there, a lot more opportunities to work there, and quite honestly, there's some funding there too where you can be fit in there. Um, if your research can be tied to CTE, career technical education, or electives, we covered how the TEKS and the content that has to be covered in those TEKS are so prescriptive, right? That a deviation from that takes a lot of coordination and a lot of conversation. But if it can fit into something that's electives or CTE, you might have more opportunities there because there's some more flexibility there, right? That's not in the TEKS, right? There's no TEKS for a lot of the electives. In fact, all the electives, I think. So there's some opportunities to be creative with what is occurring during that time. And I think one of the things that shocked me when I came to UTSA was the ease of proposal and grant submission. And I know if you've only been here, you've only been in higher education, you might be like, man, that's not true. That's pretty tough. There's a lot of steps to cover. But I can tell you firsthand that it was pretty not difficult. There was a lot of processes that had to be followed, that I think if you're coming from anywhere outside of K through 12 is just overwhelming, right? I'll give you some examples. One of the easiest examples I can give you is like the board of trustees. Any grant that was submitted had to be voted on by the board of trustees, right? Usually it went through consent and you were just good to go. There was really not a lot of conversations around it, but it did have to go forward, right? And the timeline for it is that only happens once a month. And it was usually in the beginning of the month. And the timeline for you to even get on the agenda was 6 weeks before that, right? So let's say you contacted a school district today, right? Well, you're looking about May before you can even have further conversations or submit a grant or anything like that. I thought that was great when I came here. I was like, wow, we don't have to go through all, and we might for certain circumstances, right? But I haven't been involved. We still have to work through certain channels and make sure everything's great. But yeah, when I was building, proposals in school districts, it was like very much bureaucratic. You gotta have to make sure that you follow all those processes. I mean, the size of the school district matters too, right? If when you're researching who to contact or where you want to work. In San Antonio, I'll give you an example. We have 17 school districts. I think that's actually honestly pretty low, because I don't think that accounts for like charter schools that are operating one campus or maybe a couple campuses. But we have 17 school districts in San Antonio and the surrounding area, and they run the gamut on size and students served and areas served, right? I think that's great. I think that gives you a lot more opportunity here at UTSA, right, to reach out to different school districts. And I'll tell you why, right? Because that's 17 potential partners to spread the research efforts, right, around, right? If you connect with one school district or another, it's okay, right? Because you're not overwhelming a school district. I can tell you firsthand that I worked with quite a few researchers outside of the San Antonio area, because where they were working at, where they were from, one school district served the entire city, right? And that sounds kind of neat when it comes to like processes and but what happens is you have one school district being responsible for all the research that's happening in that area, right? So we worked a lot with UT because Austin ISD is actually one school district and it serves pretty much the entire city of Austin. I think there's a couple smaller school districts in the outside area like Eanes ISD and maybe Round Rock or something. Houston ISD is also Houston's another example where we worked with partners from there because Houston ISD pretty much serves the entire city. And I know they have quite a few suburbs out there, but the actual school district itself is for the city. And something to keep in mind, larger school districts, you have a very formal process. The school district I was in was one of the larger school districts in San Antonio. It wasn't the largest, but it was pretty large. And we had a very, very, very formal process for partnering with researchers, right? We had to have board approval. We kind of talked about that. We also had to have data sharing agreements in place. And before anything can happen, the data sharing agreement had to be signed and executed. And we also had specialized departments, right? I was in a grants department. Not every school district has a grants department. Even some of the largest school districts don't have grants departments. What you'll see is, a department that wants to go after a grant or research, they do it on their own. But in the larger school districts, you'll have very, very specialized departments. And that's great because you have more support, but that's also more people that you have to talk to and get the buy-in from and everything. And then smaller school districts, I worked with them too, right? So there was a lot of collaborative proposals that went out. And, you might not have to go through the same processes with the larger school districts. You might be able to, get in a little bit easier and have those conversations a little easier. There might be some flexibility there. So that's something to keep in mind. Budgeting considerations. This is always a section that some of the support that I had to provide. If your research involves working with teachers and their need to be out of the classroom, substitute pay can quickly eat up quite a bit of your budget. Substitutes, usually you can see about $100 a day is what I would budget for if I was building a budget, because it can go up from there. This is just one example. I think this is actually a little bit low. I would budget even like 125, somewhere around there, just to be sure. So the more times a teacher has to be out of their classroom, receiving either some sort of professional development or a workshop, substitutes can quickly take a big portion of your budget. An alternative to that, and something that was really promoted when I was there, was job embedded professional development, right? So if there's an opportunity for you to provide the same research or the same treatment while the teacher stays in the classroom, that was preferable for a lot of reasons, but it definitely impacts your budget as well. If you were thinking about having a summer camp, I know that we applied to a summer camp here when I was in the College of Business. Transportation can get pretty expensive pretty fast. Asking a quote from the transportation department is pretty important, as well as teacher compensation is about $20 to $25 an hour. Again, any type of, and this, I said summer camp because that's what I worked with, right? But anytime you're taking students anywhere, right, you want to know how much it's going to cost. I had a few grants where that was overlooked. But fortunately, by the time I left, we had a really great transportation department that kind of worked out that cost beforehand. But that's something that you want to consider. And policies and processes. Again, when I came over here, I was just like, wow, this is great. We have all these resources, and a lot of this processes are managed by different departments. But if you're working in a school district, that might not happen. That's things kind of slip through the cracks, so to speak, right? MOUs, so what's going to happen, with your research? Does that have to be executed? Does that have to go to the board? IRBs, they have IRBs too. So just like we have one, every school district has an IRB. And the interesting thing is sometimes the IRB process there isn't all encompassing, right? So if it's just data, and if it's just working with students, then it might just be the IRB process, right? But if you're doing something health related, I believe that Student Health Advisory Committee is a Texas, so they call them SHACs. is a Texas mandate. So that nutrition program, the nutrition research that I referenced earlier on, that actually had to go through the IRB process and the Student Health Advisory Committee. So asking about that beforehand instead of on the back end is pretty important. Like, does this have to go through that process? And again, data sharing agreements, very, very important. It's referenced twice. Your initial.
We have two questions.
Oh, great.
From Brendy Rincon, can an activity be scheduled with teachers on Saturdays? And
yeah.
Rios, how successful are activities planned during the summer?
So the first question was, I'll go on the first question first. What was it?
Can an activity be scheduled with teachers on Saturdays?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So, and this is something when you're doing your initial conversations or your initial outreach. So, just like we have discretionary grants, right, that are what we're talking about, right, doing proposals. There's also formulaic grants, right? So there's grants that are funded by the Department of Education based on the populations you serve, right? And a lot of that is what's used for professional development, right? So one of the questions you want to ask is, what's your professional development calendar for your school district, right? What days are your teachers going to be doing professional development? And sometimes, in fact, a lot of times, there's some opportunity for you to have some influence on that, right? Yes, so the short answer is yes. I've worked quite a few proposals where there was a professional development on Saturdays or during the summertime during the week, but Saturdays was actually pretty common. But when we had that initial conversation with the faculty or with our partners, I'm going to call them partners, right? With our partners, if you can reference like, hey, what is your professional development calendar, right? If you can kind of get the groundwork for that, and there's a Saturday there, and you would say, hey, well, how many hours are there free? So what would happen is on those workshops, they would say it's an 8-hour day, right? But not all 8 hours are dedicated to the same thing for the same person, right? It was kind of like 4 hours, everybody's going to receive the same presentation, and then you would have some flexibility as to what to do with the other 4 hours, right? And 4 hours is arbitrary. I'm just picking that number, but basically that day, right? What does that look like? Well, that professional development is an opportunity. If you wanted to do something, would be an opportunity for you to ask, like, well, I just need 2 hours out of that Saturday. And perfect, there's a day for you to come in and do that. That was pretty common, actually. That was actually pretty common. So professional development calendar. That's a good topic of conversation. And what was the other question, Christina?
Right here, sorry, couldn't find it. How successful are activities planned during the summer?
That actually I'm going to say for students. I'm going to talk about students first. So for that, you're going to want to think about the enrichment, right? So they're what is called like remedial time in the summertime, right? So summer school, right? Basically summer school, right? If you had a student that didn't perform well in their class or didn't pass a class, summer school was typically what was offered then, right? But some of the new activities that a lot of the school districts were moving towards was that extended learning time, right? That extended learning time. So, and I'll bring up these two words, enrichment and acceleration, right? That happened during the summertime, right? So enrichment activities for students, right, were those camps, right? Or sports, or band or something, right? So an opportunity for students to be in an academic environment where they're learning something, right? And they were very popular. And I can tell you right now, there was never enough, right? There was a huge demand for some sort of enrichment activity to happen over the summer, right? And it doesn't have to be the whole summer, right? I mean, that's a long time too, right? But if there was an opportunity for enrichment for a couple weeks, right, or a week, or however long you have envisioned in your research, I can tell you that's very, very popular, probably in all school districts, right? There's grants, a lot of grants. The biggest one is the 21st Century Community Learning Centers grants. That's the biggest one. And believe it or not, there's a lot of funding there because it's something that all the school districts want to do. They want to provide those enrichment activities because what happens is it's closing that gap, right? That not just the learning gap, but the brain drain, the summer drain, right? So that's pretty popular. And then acceleration. The other word was acceleration. So is if there's an opportunity for you to provide something that accelerates the learning of students during the summertime, I can tell you right now that's very well received. Yeah, those are my two. That's what my feedback would be. Is that the last question, Christina?
That is the last question. Thank you.
Great. So when you're conducting your outreach, again, this is what like my firsthand experience, right? The best outreach is honestly the principals. Principals have extreme influence on their campus, right? They're responsible for the campus and the learning that occurs on that campus. So your initial outreach to a principal after you've looked at the resources that are in the PowerPoint, right? So after you've seen if they're a comprehensive or support school, after you've kind of noticed, okay, your TEKS aligns with that grade level, this is the school. A principal is a great contact. Just an email, a phone call, very beneficial. Some of the larger school districts have department directors for English and for math or for CTE, career and technical education, who also can provide a lot of influence on what occurs on the campuses. That might be an appropriate resource. But I'm going to espouse reaching out to the grants departments first. And maybe that's selfishly or just because that was the only role that I fulfilled in the school district. But a lot of times what would happen was that we would receive an email saying, hey, I'm so-and-so. They would provide, I think I put 1 to 2 page summary because that's what I'm familiar with the NSF, but it can be less than that, just if you can do a 1-page introductory, email that says like, hey, this is what I'm interested in pursuing. I noticed this opportunity. I think it fits well on your campus. My research aligns with this TEKS or with this goal that you have in mind. What we would do is we would receive those emails and then we would forward them to the appropriate contact, right? And say, hey, can we set up a meeting? This looks great. Our goal in the grants department was to bring in external funding, right, and influence and positively influence the education of the students. So we were always pretty eager to partner and help with different groups. So when we received those, it was pretty beneficial. And I don't want to make it sound like we were constantly conducting these outreach activities and doing partnerships. A lot of times it was just that cold email, right? We didn't know who they were. We didn't know what their interests were, but if we received a good email and it had provided some information, we definitely forwarded it to the appropriate contact point, and a lot of great projects started that way. I can't tell you how many projects we worked on with faculty. It was just so many, so many. So it was great. But when you're doing like some of that conversations we had, right, what we would do is we would set up follow-up meetings or phone calls. Back when you could meet in person, we usually would meet in person. And some of the things that were always well received was avoiding one and done projects, right? I think that, when you meet initially and it's like, hey, I want to do this. This is great. I'm going to wrap it up and then I'm going to go and publish or, I'll see you later. But if there was some of that conversation was like, hey, this is the first plan. How does it fit into some of your larger goals and how can we build upon it, right? If you could express, plans for building upon the project of this is where we want to start, I'm hoping that either we sustain it in the future or we build upon it. those were always the projects that we had a lot of great success with. And funding, I'll give you an example, that nutrition one, right? That nutrition one started with, I believe it was an NIH grant. And I believe it was an NIH grant, right? And so everything was great, right? We took the pictures. There was a report provided to the board of trustees, like a small presentation. It wasn't that long, but it was a small presentation to the board of trustees. And then what happened next, right? We were there, and we said, okay, well, we know that these are what students are eating. We've already developed a treatment, right? We're serving different food. Actually, what came about that is that they ended up serving food on a different type of tray, which was pretty interesting, because it was more, I don't know, friendly and conducive to the students eating that type of food, or that food that was being served. But then what happened was, I believe what happened was that there was some like nutritional and educational books that were kind of built off of the lessons learned from there. I don't say you have to do it that in depth or anything, but basically when you have some initial conversations, kind of express that, hey, I want to be around here for a while. I want to do this, and I want to, build on it, and I want to keep it going after the year, 2 year, or however long it is finished. Some internal resources here within UTSA. If you need some expertise on like pedagogy or curriculum design or student teacher development, principal development, school turnaround, I encourage you to reach out to College of Education. They're experts in connecting your research with how it should be taught, basically. So definitely, and then of course each one of us, SGDC, we're I think represented in each college. I think we all have the ability to make that initial contact, to kind of lift that off of your plate while you concentrate on, developing your research. If you need to have some support, actually, one of the reasons I worked with my counterpart, Monica Trevino, she was awesome to work with. I worked with her on a lot of these projects with UTSA, and she was often the first person I heard from saying, hey, I've got this great project. How can we meet? When can we meet to talk about it further? She did a lot of that outreach. So yeah, she was my colleague, and she is now my colleague. But before that, I worked with her for many years, developing research projects. And I think that concludes my research. I know my presentation, I know it was a little bit short. I apologize, but I don't know if there's any other opportunities, any other questions out there.
Okay, so we've got one from Jenna Gonzalez. A great presentation. You discussed enrichment and out-of-school time opportunities. I was wondering about your experience with K-12 partnerships with the humanities, music and English. How can these faculty leverage these partnerships? What are some benefits and challenges, and how can they get started?
Mm-hmm. So we never directly received, or no, actually, yeah, we did. There was a grant that was going to provide, what is it? It was on small students. I forget the name. I think it was like the wolf trap. It was a real weird name. It had to do with wolves. I know that much. And that's why the name sticks out. But what happened was this group was going, and it wasn't unfortunately it wasn't an IHE or that we worked with, but it did have to focus on music. And what it was it was going to provide training to teachers on how to integrate music curriculum to enhance, or how music enhance the instruction, the daily instruction, right? I think it was targeting smaller students, though. I want to say, or younger students, I should say. I want to say like kindergarten, early childhood education. I want to say it was Wolf Trap Society, yeah. And there was a grant that funded that type of effort. So there's opportunities there. Also, I'll say that although I didn't work on a grant beyond that one. I didn't say like, oh, I'm gonna apply to such and such. specifically for a humanities related grant. I did know in quite a few instances where there were faculty that would go in and provide some enrichment to students on paintings, I believe. And what happened was that there was they were donating like poster prints of paintings and putting them around the schools. And what occurred there is so this is all about relationship building, right? I mean, it's not a one and done, like, hey, we're gonna meet, we're gonna go after grant, and that's it. What happened was, I don't know if that person was from UTSA specifically, but I know for sure it was a faculty member from a higher education working with this campus. And what they wanted to do was talk about the benefits of, or expose students to the benefits of art appreciation, right? And they made contact with the principal. They had that. That was a long-standing program there. I don't know if any grants came out of it, not to the school district, but maybe there might have been something that came to UTSA out of it. Or I don't know if they were UTSA, whatever Institute of Higher Education they were at. So just that outreach, I think, just that outreach, you'll see that a lot of school district staff, principals, teachers, they're eager to introduce their students to different concepts and different lessons. So, even if it's a grant doesn't come out of it right away, there might be an opportunity later on down the road.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today, Jaime. You've provided a wealth of information, and I'm really excited to have the opportunity to share this later on. A recording will go out to everyone who attended today, and a copy of the presentation that Jaime provided. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.